so this is the last class of the session. So next session, it sounded like everyone was super into doing like koi fish. So we'll definitely do that. And from the consensus, lots of little projects seem like everyone's more desirable option than like one long project. So I was thinking, oh, and if you want to like go vote on that because you think you have a different idea, you can go on the Facebook page that I created, like the little group, and there's the poll. But so far that's what I see from everybody. So I was thinking I would do for the stuff that I do, like the print stuff, like this thing, I actually do like design kits in watercolor. So it's not actually a finished painting. It's just like an octopus and then some other elements in watercolor, and then I put it together in Photoshop. So I thought we could do a whole bunch of like, I would design a design kit, and then we would do like a full design kit together. And then I would do a last class to show you guys what I do in Photoshop. Maybe like an extra class we'll still do full of watercolor, but then we'll do like an extra one. And I'll show you how I deal with that in Photoshop. And then how I upload that to like print on demand stuff. So that's pretty cool. It could be useful, and it'll be a little extra bonus, but that way we can like figure out how to, if we're just doing like little pieces, how to sort of put them together into bigger projects. So yeah, koi fish I think will be kind of winner for that, and they're fun, and I'll try to come up with a cool style. The thing when you're doing design kits, and this is where I have like the hardest time because I'm scattered, but sticking to one style for like a final project. So I'll pick a style and then we'll go with that. So yeah, that's it for that today. So we're gonna do in this class, let me just show you, I'm gonna switch to my screen share. All right, share, there we go. So for today, I kind of had a tall order. I wanted to sort of add everything that we did so far, and then kind of like maybe push a little bit further in terms of color mixing, and also just some sort of like concepts for helping composition and stuff. So basically I thought that we could work with some different tones, because we've been working all in the purple tones, and I've partly been doing that because it's really easy to mix purple colors. You can't really mess it up so much. As soon as we start introducing some of these subtle yellows and reds, it gets a little bit more complicated, just because I find that certain pigments are more pigmented, and then getting like a really soft, like making these kind of colors that are sort of desaturated, but they're like non-colors. It's like not yellow and it's not pink, but getting these sort of like weird tones is kind of difficult. So I thought I'd sort of go over a little bit of that different approach to our color mixing, I guess. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about contrast. So just how to draw the eye around. And then there's something that is actually called, and I think I've lost my page now. Let's see if I can find it. It's called Subsurface Scattering. Oh, I closed my reference. I'm so good at this. I have so many tabs open too. Just a second. It was just open. I'm so sad. No, just a minute. Maybe it's on this one. Yeah, it's on this one. Okay, so subsurface scattering. So what we're seeing in these right here, this is the light passing through the petal, and it sort of changes the hue and illuminates the petal. And the best example of this actually comes from digital art, and it's like a super nerdy thing, but it's called subsurface scattering. And basically like it happens, you'll see in the hand when the sun passes through it, and then you can see the blood through the hand. I'm sure when you guys were little, you held like a flashlight up to your fingers to see that sort of effect. And you can also see it like here. So when it comes to like 3D graphics, there's all kinds of crazy weird computational stuff that happens back end that creates shaders that does this stuff, but we're just going to try to like mimic it in watercolor. And I think the easiest way to do that is just to kind of keep really light pure tones, but then contrast it behind a dark. So it's a really good way to get sort of luminosity is to have a contrast. And then we can also use things like complementary color a little bit. So here we've got some more yellow tones, and if you put like purple, dark purples behind it, it's going to help the yellows pop forward. And warm colors always come forward and cool colors always push backwards. So this is one reason why it could be a good exercise to go sort of warmer on these flower tones and then cooler in the background and darker. So I sent you these references already. This is sort of the original one that I used in my example, which I'm not gonna use my example anymore. We're gonna completely change it. But I'm just using it for the shape and some of the details, but then I'm sort of referring to like this one maybe for lighting and this one for some extra color information. And then this was a really cute painting that I found, and I'll see if I can find the artist's name again. It's written down here. It's just so small I can't read it. And it's almost getting there. Like this is really nice up here. But then I was thinking, like, when it comes to lighting, contrast is so important. So that this is what I actually sent you guys. And in doing this little tweak, to be honest, I ruined a little bit of her subtlety in here because it becomes just like over exposed a little bit. But I've darkened a lot around it and down in here. And I think you can see it's a little bit subtle, but your eye in this one goes immediately to this flower. Whereas in this one, it's sort of, this whole thing sort of sits on the same plane and it sort of all demands your attention. And the other thing that we can try is our level of detail. So when you want someone to look somewhere that's really important, you put all of your detail there. And then when you want someone to sort of just gloss over it, so it's important but less important, you put a little bit less detail in it. So we'll try to play with that a little bit. It's maybe a tall order for one class, but we'll see if we can sort of get through that. I usually, when I work, keep my reference images open like this, just so I can refer back. So I don't know if you guys have that, but if you do, that's cool. If not, you can just kind of follow along. And I will just switch to, does anyone have questions so far? You're good. It's good. It's kind of a whole ton of art information condensed in a tiny little speech. It's like years of, whoops. No, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this one. It's years of art school talking at you in like 2 minutes. All right, so here's the drawing that I started, and I've added a couple extra little things just so I'm not copying fully, and I've sort of changed the design a little bit. I also went ahead and just added in my key areas a little bit of masking fluid. I think what we'll do, because we want to work so much with lighting, I think we're going to work in the background first and just try to set some really nice darks and then go light forward. So this was the one that I had originally done, but I just want to play with some other ones. And then this was another one that you guys never saw that I had started. So I want to sort of do like between this and this, and maybe go a little bit less just like washes here, and maybe sort of hint at some foliage detail in the back, just so it's a little bit less like washy, I guess, and a little bit more structured. So like I said, I know that I want to go into the warm yellows and reds. So complementary of red is green, and then complementary of yellow is purple. So we can go already into, actually, let me switch my palette here. And you know, I'm using like a flat brush, but it might even be smart of me to take a flat one for this, just so I can cover some bigger areas. And I'm just gonna start by taking my blue or green and just kind of make some dark colors here. I've got some like bluey, this one is, I don't know what you guys have in your palette, so it's gonna be a little bit different, but I've got the Prussian blue that's really dark and very sort of green already, next to some cerulean, which is this one. And then I've got, I think this is a Viridian green. Yeah, Viridian, which is also a really dark green. So you can just kind of pick your darker bluey green hues. This is kind of making a really nice turquoise color. And I'll just put like a wash to start. And I might want to, at some point, leave some spaces in here just for some like brighter greens, just so it looks like something's happening. And I'm gonna try to be careful on my edges. I'm going a little bit fast because this is sort of a limited time we have in a class. But I'm just gonna kind of start making this dark already. Mm. It helps a little bit if you wet the page a tiny bit, just so that your paints don't sit too much into the fibers while you work. It's a little bit of a security net to help it blend. And then you can kind of dip into your colors again, and it'll give you like a slightly different hue. And it just kind of adds some interest. Maybe a little bit more green up in here. To go dark with watercolor, you kind of have to add a few layers. So I just want to darken my background as quickly as possible. And to do that, you want to kind of have a lot of paint on your brush. We're going a little bit less for subtlety on this part. It also doesn't need to be too well defined because we don't want people to look at it necessarily. It's just sort of like supporting our actual painting, like the flower. It would normally take about 3 times as much time as I take during the class to get this done. But you'll get the idea. It's like speed painting. So I'm using a pretty loaded brush on here. It's not quite a dry brush technique, but it's not totally a wet technique either. If you find you've just put too much paint somewhere, just add some water over it while it's still wet, and it'll help to just break it up a little bit. All right, so now I know that this isn't dark enough. So the part that's more dry up here, I'm just gonna go in with some more of my blues, but I'm gonna add a touch of purple. And maybe even just some of my Alizerian crimson, which is like a purpley red, just to deepen in some of those shadows up in here. It'll help to contrast. Adding the purples in here is going to help contrast the yellows that we're going to lay in later. I'm really going for like an organic mixing technique right now in my colors. I'm just kind of picking them up and remixing them. It just gives me a lot more variation. And then they'll also sit on top of the colors that were underneath. So it adds a lot of richness by doing it this way. Oh. I'm going to try an experiment at the end that I've never tried in watercolor. So we'll see how it works. But the nice thing about watercolors is that, especially this size, it's like a study size. So if you mess up, it's not really the end of the world. It's not like a 5-foot canvas that you've messed up or painted into a corner. And then I'm just kind of dabbing in, now that it's sort of all finished, I'm grabbing some extra color, like some of the purples and things. And my brush is pretty wet, but I'm just dabbing into the already wet parts where I've already colored. And it's just gonna help to add a little bit of extra depth and variation. I'm just gonna let that bleed around a little bit. I'm kind of going for the look of like the background, but with a FOV on it, on the camera, like a depth of field. So it's blurred. And I'm gonna stay dark in toward the petals. So I get that nice contrast with the white and the yellow. I'm just gonna let that dry. But how are you guys doing? So this is obviously like the darkest I've gone so far in any of these classes. Sometimes I keep one of my pages on hand just so I can fan it gently. It helps it dry. I've got some cooling water. You can just take a paper towel and gently dab it, and it'll pick up some of that cooling water. I can always go back over the background later when it's dry if I want to add a little bit more intensity. But the important thing right now is to have the edges dry for when we go back into the flower. My partner's putting the dog in her crate with her Kong, but she knows that it means that usually it means that we're leaving the house. So she's a little bit hesitant. She's like, hey, I'm not sure about this game. All right, while this dries and while you guys are working, I'm just gonna move this aside. So I have an awesome kit of watercolor pencil crayons. They were really inexpensive, and they're so pigmented, it's unbelievable. So this is one of the things that I like to have on hand when I want to do really detailed work and adding texture to my stuff, because you can get obviously a really nice sharp point with these. And like, I feel like this color is perfect for some of the colors in the flowers. So sometimes you just get colors that don't exist in paint, so you don't even have to mix them. I'll try to mix this color later just to show you what I might do. But these things, the fun thing about them is you can dry over a dry painting. Like I could go over this one with some maybe pinks if I wanted to do some detail, and I can just go in and just do like really nice line work. And it just adds some texture. You can also go in and shade. Let me see if I want to add some, if I wanted to darken and create a shadow in here, I can kind of go in and just lightly shade over this. And it just sits on top. So you can go in with, it's almost like a normal pencil crayon like this. When you're using it dry over something that's already dry, it just adds a lot of really nice, rich texture. The other way that you can use these is, let's say, this is probably really pigmented, so I'll show you. I can draw some like crosshatch lines, for example. And then I can go in with, let me see, I'll find a little brush, with a little brush and water. And then I could like crosshatch back over and it'll start to smudge it. But I can still keep some of the line work if I wanted. Or, so this is a way to get, like if you want some line work mixed with your watercolor painting, or I can go in with like a larger brush and more water and actually go and pretty much completely blend this out. I wouldn't press too hard if you want to use it for blend. So normally if I wanted to actually use this to blend, I would sort of lightly go over the surface of the paper using the side of the pencil like this. And then you can take your brush and this makes a nice wash. And the colors are great. There's a little bit of blue mixed in here because I didn't clean my brush fully, but it makes actually for really nice colors, I find. And then you can use it in conjunction with the watercolor for detail. And they're also super portable, so you could have like a pencil case of these and go traveling and have fun drawing. So there's something that I really do like to add to my stuff. I'll probably go over my thing later with them because I know that not everybody has some, just to show you what I might do, but it's definitely a cool option to have. How are your pieces? Are they like, they're drying? We'll shake them out, give them a little shake. I'm using crappier paper today, so it is buckling. You can iron out watercolor paper and it will actually, even when it dries, it will flatten again. So if you're getting a lot of buckling now, don't worry about it too much. It will kind of change how things bleed, but I actually kind of like how organic that ends up. So I don't really mind so much about the buckling paper. So like just a note for this, because we're going extra fast for a class, my edges, I don't know if you can see them, they're really, really, really sloppy. Normally I would take about 3 times as much time to do this and really carefully go in with my tools, but we just don't have time for that. So do forgive yourselves if your pieces look a little bit less polished than you would like. I know that you can definitely get a more polished looking piece with a little bit more time. All right, so let's talk about some of these colors. As I said, this weird sort of orange color is something that I think works well. And this is actually another cool reason for having these pencil crayons is now I have like a reference for a color. And sometimes this helps me mix. It if you work off a screen, it can be a little bit deceiving because your images, your reference images are backlit, and you're not, it's hard to gauge actually what's happening with color. So sometimes if you're doing like a really serious piece, like client work or something, it can be a really good idea to actually print it out, and then kind of go from there. But even printed works, there's obviously like a color shift when things print, so you're never going to get true colors, but you'll get a better idea. And then I just kind of go like sort of instinctually from there, I guess I could say. So I think like this orange, it's not yellow and it's not orange, and it's a little bit desaturated and earthy. So let me see the stone brush. I've got like this beautiful color right here, which is called a burnt sienna. And then I also have a cadmium red, which is kind of an orangey red. So it's kind of fun actually. I do this all the time with my little extra piece. I'll just take the burnt sienna so you can see it. I set it here. So that's the burnt sienna. It's kind of a nice earthy orange. And that's where I feel like I can get some of the earth tones in this color. The cadmium red, and I think it's cadmium red, yeah, it's pale hue. So it's like a little bit brighter than the darker hues. But this has a little bit more like red in it. I think it might even be too much. And then other colors that I would consider mixing into this just to get the color that I really want, because I find this a little bit like dull. We could add some yellow, cadmium yellow. I'm just going to show you what this looks like just out of the tube. So cadmium yellow is very lemony. It's not as lemon as a lemon yellow. It's still on the orange side and not the green side, but it's pretty lemony. And then, so I think if I were to mix, the other one that I would consider is yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a yellow, but it's also an earthy yellow. I'm just gonna drop some of this in here. And I'll just show you, it's kind of golden. It's a really pretty color also. So this is like the yellow ochre. And I think it's a bit too golden. So I think actually what I will do with this one, and this is kind of like why it's nice to have extra paper sometimes. You can just see what your pigments are out of your tube. So I'm gonna take my burnt sienna, which is like an earthy orange color. And I'm gonna mix it with some of my cadmium yellow. And now I've got something that it's not quite this color. This one's almost a little bit more pink. So maybe I would add like a tiny little bit of that cadmium red. But I can kind of get some nice earthy orange hues, and then I can work within this. So once I have my base colors, I can go like darker with more orange or more red, and then lighter with more yellow. So, and I can also just like add more water. So if I do this orange and then I want to go lighter toward the tips of the petals from here, I might take some more of that just yellow and let it blend into this. And then I might add like a little bit of, you know what, almost because it goes into shadow, I might even add a little bit of like a more blue orange to go into my burnt sienna, just to give some sort of shadow color in here. So I'm basically going right now from like a bluey red color to an earthy orange to a yellow to get a gradient. And that's how we can check if we just look at the, I'm going to share my screen for a sec again. So like here, it's actually even more pink, but then it goes through all these like yellow hues. These are really white, so you would just leave more paper showing. And then you can go like into the more yellow, like just adding more yellow to it, and then into the oranges, like that burnt sienna, and then into the pinks and the reds down in here. Here it's softer, so I might stick to these more like saturated colors because I just think it's going to be easier for now. But that's how I would like sort of turn the forms on this flower, like reddy blues in the shadows, through the oranges, and then into like a strong yellow, and then a really light yellow for next to our purples. So yeah, that's what we will aim for this one. So now we're out of blues. It's like a whole other ball game when it comes to reds and yellows. They can actually be quite a challenge. Oh yeah, one thing I've mentioned it before, I talked to somebody about this, I don't remember, but adding white to things. You need white because, not necessarily with watercolor, but it will actually like give you a higher value in color. So if I were to take, just for an example, if I were to take this red and put it here, and I'm using it a bit more like strongly like I would for an acrylic or something. So normally if you wanted a lighter color, everyone's go-to, generally speaking, is to take white and add it. But you can see, I think you can see it right now. What it also does is it desaturates that color. Can you guys see that? Tiny little bit. I should go bigger, huh? This is just like, this is partly why, in a way, watercolors are easier, because we just don't use white, so we don't run into these problems. So there's my pink or red. So this is actually good if you need to desaturate a color, but if you need it to stay vibrant because it's close, or it's like we're trying to capture this lighting effect, it's not good. So if I add white here, you can see it like becomes a lighter color, but it also starts to desaturate. So this is just something to really watch out for in painting in general. So the other option then, if you want to make like a brighter red, is to take, I'm just going to take this red mixture, and instead of adding a white, you add a strong yellow and maybe a little bit of white. And then you'll keep more of the saturation, but you'll still end up with a lighter color and value. This gets like super nerdy, but you can see this is a lot hotter than this, and there's a lot more saturation. This becomes kind of like, let's see if I can show it. It's not picking up the best on the camera, but this becomes more pink and a lot less saturated. And then this becomes more orange, and it keeps its saturation just by adding more yellow than white to the mix. This just becomes, when this dries, it's going to look kind of pasty and like chalky. So that's just what happens with white in paint. It's just to like, as for future knowledge. But that's why I'm suggesting we take like sort of a medium orange tone and then go yellow and then red from there, instead of adding necessarily whites to our thing. Okay, that was a big speech. Now, actually painting. Let's start softly with this, and I'm just gonna take my mix of a little bit of yellow and my orange, and I want to keep actually quite a bit of water in this. Just my color. It's pretty lemony still. Add a little bit more. Okay. I want to keep quite a bit of water in this because this is the part that's up near the top of the leaf where the sun, or petal, sorry, where the sun would come through. And I'm just going to lay out some of this color. I just want to give a wash so it's not white, but I want it to stay fairly light. I've already right now gone way too far in the saturation. So I'm going to just remove some of this by adding water, and then I might dab it off. Just really, really light, so it's not white. but it's also very light. And I'm trying to imagine if the sun were behind this flower, where would it hit? And it would hit on any parts of the petal that are not being overlapped by other petals. So as soon as I have this one coming in front of it, I'm not going on that petal right now. We're going to treat that one a little bit differently. And same with these parts that are kind of turning up toward the back, where the sun would be behind it. And then also on the tips down here. I might leave the middle because maybe there's some shadows over here, so I'll just let those stay darker. And then over here, where this is sort of turning up against the sky. And then it's overlapping, so I'm just going to watch out down here where the petals come back in from underneath. And let's say maybe a little bit down here, but I actually want to keep the focus up on the leaf. So I'm going to do less on the bottom one because I want to keep the top one brightest, and we're going to go like a tone darker on the bottom one. And then from here, so this whole petal, let's go like a little bit pink along the edge, stay a little bit light in here, and then go really yellow. So actually, let's just tackle this sort of like a little bit more orangey yellow and a little bit stronger as a color into the body, like right in here. And I'm just following, I'm kind of drawing in the direction that the veins of the petal are going. So this petal does need to be darker than the one that we just painted. And this is my first time doing this particular painting, so you guys are getting basically like a blow by blow of what happens in my head when I'm actually painting. I kind of sort of have an idea of where I'm going, but it's a lot of sort of trial and error and making it up as I go along. It's like making it up, but with a whole lot of knowledge in my head at the same time. It's not just like reinventing the wheel every time, but it's definitely, I feel like I'm kind of thrown into a puzzle every time. Take some of these pinks up here, just so I can get a differentiation line between the first petal and the second one. I'm going really light right now too. We're going to darken it later because it's hard to go light after you've laid down a whole bunch of dark color in watercolor. It's better to stay a little bit light to begin with and then build from there. And I'm going to go more into my oranges because we're coming sort of down into these sections. So this kind of turns in toward the bottom of the flower here, and it gets quite dark. So I'm going to start letting that happen. So when I paint this way in watercolor, I sort of use my tools a little bit more like drawing utensils and a little bit less like sort of use the flow of the water a little bit less. And then I'm going to add, because it's darker down there and I want still more gradient because it goes actually quite dark, I'm going to add some of those red blues in there. We could even go almost into purple in some of these areas. So the problem that I'm having right now is that this red that I've just mixed is way too saturated to be a shadow. I'm just going to let it blend out a little bit, and then I'm going to add some purples in or blues in just to sort of push it back. And I'll probably go back over that again, and I'm going to take my shadow color and just add it in through here. So I'm trying to just establish right now where my depth is on these petals. I'll go back in and redefine that later. All right, and then I'm going to take my orange, sort of just my middle ground orange, and I'm just going to go sort of the edge of this petal where it's like overlapping, and I'm just going to draw some sort of like little shadows, but really orange hot ones, into where the light goes, just to sort of get some of that detailing that happens in those petals there, and also to define this edge a little bit where it comes over. I don't want to touch the part right on the top because I want to keep that really light. But I just want to define that little area a little bit. So I'm not trying to paint every little vein right now. I'm just trying to follow the direction, but I'm really trying to mass out what would be where the shadows are and the highlights. Define my shapes. We can add detail later. And like sort of we're adding the overall shadows right now. We can add the internal shadows or the detail shadows later. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the petals that come this way. And just go again like more to my orange color. And then go sort of towards some pinks and reds in toward the center. And then again, if your shadows are too saturated, they're not going to push back. So because we're using reds, we can add the blue hues to them. Oranges and yellows. So in the parts that are like turning underneath, there's some parts of these flowers that sort of turn into stem. You can actually add some greens to your oranges, and it gives this sort of earthy tone that's somewhat between an orange and a green. And especially if you use a green that looks more like bright, like a yellowy green. It'll work better with a yellowy green. I've got some of that going on. You can see here, and it will also help to drop some of those shadows back. And then it will also create sort of a transition if you want to add some blue greens into your green foliage later. The minute you start adding complementary colors together, the minute things start to darken and desaturate. So I'm sort of using that to its advantage by mixing the oranges that I've used with the greens. And then it will also sort of create, because we're using the same colors essentially, it creates sort of more harmony between your color mixing. And then I can take my more blue-green, like the Viridian that's in the background. And if I add that to the shadows, it will help to push back into the background where the shadows are in my greens. And it will also help to tie them into the background there. And then you kind of get these nice color blends that happen and nice tones that happen. Okay. Man, these take so long to do. They're like, it's a quick medium, but it's also, when you, as soon as you start getting into detail, they can take quite a bit of time to finish. I think what's gonna happen with this is I'm not gonna do the bottom flower. So what I wanted to try, because we won't have time, but I think I'll just film it in another video and then just upload it so you guys can watch it. But what I want to try with this is paint the same flower. Actually, you know what? I'm going to try it here. Paint the same flower, but then darken it with my background color. So let's pretend for a moment that this is the painting. So I've got these like purples and greens mixed up. I'm just going to like mix a lot of water in. So it's like a really light wash. And then just very gently, obviously we need a lot of water, go over the top of it. So I just did like a wash that was fairly even. But as you can see, it grayed out and dropped this flower back. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest going over the whole thing evenly, but you could do a very, very fine amount. And let's say, like, for example, it were this part and I just wanted to drop some of it into the background. I could just touch it on the parts that I wanted to drop back. So let's say we wanted to push like this petal into the background. So what's happening is it's desaturating it and it's darkening it. And especially if these colors match the background, it's gonna push everything back. So to get this effect that I wanted to go for, I'm just gonna share my screen again. To get this effect, whereas like this was the starting painting and then this is what I wanted to aim for in the lighting, this is what I was gonna try. And this is actually called, I've never done it with watercolor, it's my first time playing with this, but it's called glazing. It's an old master's tradition with oil painting from like the Renaissance. But yeah, it's like just it's just a way to like drop things backwards and add layers of color. So this is what I'll do when I finish this part. All right, so as you can see, like this is nowhere near finished and it's already like 7 o'clock. Oh my God, these are long. Do you guys, here just a sec, do you guys want another class to finish this together? Or are you like done for the session, or can we unmute everybody? Because this is taking way longer than I expected. Yeah, you're good. It's good. You guys are faster than me.
Moi, j'aimerais bien.
A note core? Do you guys want to do next week too? We could finish this instead of rushing through it.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, let's do it. Then I won't rush. Okay. So we can actually do a nice piece. This is the advantage of longer pieces. We can kind of get more in depth. When we just do little quick ones, it's harder to. And like this is kind of more demanding with technique too. So yeah, so now basically like in that case, let's just do another wash down here. So again, like I've got my greens set up with by mixing my oranges and my greens and my reds just to get those blends. And then I know my background colors are these purple and teal colors. So anything that I want to drop back in my painting, I'm going to use these background colors, and anything that I want to come forward, I'm going to keep these warm ones. So that's just sort of the theory that I use to balance this stuff out. And then but this one, this underneath flower, we want it to stay the same flower because it's the same plant, but we're going to drop it back later. So in terms of painting it right now, I'm actually not going to change what I'm doing. I'm actually just going to continue with like adding my little light yellows, sort of where the sun would hit, which should be in here. I'm sort of watching how the petals fold on themselves to understand where to lay these colors down. It's going to be a little bit too intense, so I'm just going to wipe it off. And then in here, with my orange, which I used all up, add some more orange in. I'll go into sort of the darker center portion. I always want to make sure I don't have too much paint on my brush, because if you do, when you start, it can stick into the fibers. And then it's sometimes hard to blend it out after. But already I know, like, regardless of what I'm going to do with the glazing later, I already know that this flower does push back into the shadow anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and add my red colors to it. and some of my blues so that I can actually just start it moving toward the back behind this petal. All right, we'll turn the form on the little individual petals later, but we'll just kind of get these colors laid in. I'm trying to get just the values. This is what I do in the first passes of paintings. I get the values established and the color palette established first before I bother with too many details on things. Because if you start in detailing, but your lights and your composition and your colors aren't working, the details have nothing to sit on. So you kind of need to establish all of that before you bother going into the nitty-gritty final touches. It's like writing a choreography. You start with the big lines first, figure out what your music's doing and how you're going to express it, and then you figure out if you're doing like 2 Mayas and an Omi, or a Maya and an Omi and an undulation later. So I see also on these petals, and I do like how it's mixing, that there's some, I'm just gonna like bring this up to share screen again. Share. Wait, do you guys see the screen? Probably, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can see here there's greens coming in here. So I'm just gonna add those because it will push it back too. So this is the green and reds and oranges I was talking about. There is actually quite a bit of green on these tips of all these flowers. And it's just like mixing so beautifully anyways with those oranges in here. I don't know if you guys can see it well. I feel like my camera lighting gets a bit washed out, but it's a lot of nice colors that happen by mixing those oranges and sort of a yellow green together. And it does help to push sections of the painting back. And this will go through a phase where it's not going to look like much, guys. It's going to look like kind of sloppy like this, where it's just a little bit of color everywhere, but we'll fix that in the next, for sure in the next class, because we'll get to more details, and that's where everything sort of starts falling together. I'll go a little bit more reddy orange in this. Bit right. If it's too much paint, just dab it off. Okay, and then this big petal here, again, it's like mostly like facing forward. So I'm just gonna try to like fill a color in that makes sense. So kind of yellowy orange. And then into some reds. I'm essentially taking my cue from this petal up here that's not in the light, but is like sort of hidden from the light from the petal just behind it. So I want something that's sort of similar in color and value. And I've gone too dark in the center, so I'm just gonna dab off a little bit, just kind of keeping the saturation and the darkness where I want it, and then go back in with my more ready color. Probably gonna be more green. And then up in the center of the flower, I'm noticing a lot of those sort of darker ready pinks because it goes back into shadow. So I'm just gonna go straight in for that. I want to help push this back a little bit. So it's less saturated. I've added more blues into my reds, pushing it more towards these purple colors. And all right, I'm missing some background. So anywhere where you've realized that you've maybe just missed some background holes or whatever, you can go and fill those in too. And then I'll finish my little stems off. I added a little bud here just for fun. You want to make sure you don't go too like berry colored on it if you're already in sort of earthy tones, and you just, like I said before, you do that by adding the complementary. So in all of my greens here, I'm adding oranges to them. I'll let it go more berry into the shadow, and I might actually even desaturate some of these colors later when we go back over, and if I darken them up. Saturation will compete for focal point, so if I keep my background this saturated, it's gonna take attention away from the flowers themselves. So when we go back over this, I'll desaturate it. And actually, maybe that's something you could do like before next week. So I've got purples. I might go in with like, let's see, if I take a purple, it'll actually darken it too. And I say maybe like, I add some greens directly in it. So already I've got something that's much more gray. And then if I add maybe some of this orange in it, or it's the cadmium red actually. So I'll just show you what color I get. So I get this actually really dark earthy color now. Here, it's like gray pretty much, but like a greeny gray. So I might just go back in and carefully go over my background. And again, it darkens it, but I still get some of this texturing that I had from my first sort of pass of it. But now, because it's more desaturated, I'm going to get a better read on the flowers here, because my initial mix for the background was like competing a little bit too much in terms of saturation. So here's another one that I just mixed that's more earthy. It's like a different sort of tone of earthy gray. And it's just basically mixing different versions of red and green and orange on my palette. But it will also add, it's a little bit much paint. It'll add some sort of variation. Controlling saturation is kind of it's a big deal a little bit in painting. It can really help your works to recognize when something isn't working because it's too saturated. See, already this is starting to glow just by doing this. I don't know if you guys can see it, but now that I'm pushing these values back here, to be a little bit more earthy and darker, all of these edges are starting to, that's too much. They're starting to glow. It's also going to establish how dark I can go in my shadows within the flower later. So the complementary of yellow is purple. So if you ever want to drop a purple back and gray it out, or if you want to make a yellow more desaturated and darker, you can add purple to it. And red and green are complementary, and blue and orange. Orange and purple. No, blue and orange. Oh, I'm gonna go confused. Purple and yellow, and red and green. There we go. I got it out. Those are the complementaries. Alrighty. So I will maybe stop this because I think probably it's getting late, and I know it's really late where some people live, like way out east. What time is it there now?
10:13.
10:13 in Montreal, and out east it's like 11 something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll stop you for now then tonight. But yeah, if you can like maybe just desaturate and darken your background, and then you should start to see these warmer colors. I'm like pointing to my paper. There we go. There we go. Okay, yeah, if you can darken and desaturate in here, and then it really helps to bring those colors out so they pop a little bit better. And then you'll start to see the glow effect a little bit more. So then next week we'll just like continue this, but we'll go more into like depth on bringing out all of the detailing and like balancing the shadows and stuff within the piece. Does that work?
Sounds
We
great.
needed one extra class. I try my best. It's hard to get them all done in one class.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks,
you so
guys. Yeah, thanks. We'll see you guys next week.
Est-ce que tu veux voir mon travail?
Oui, je veux voir. If anyone wants to show what they've done, I want to see it. It's not late for me. I'm just getting off for you guys. Oh, that looks good. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, good ones. Awesome. Yeah, cool. So when you want like really smooth, if you ever you want smooth blends on things, you can use like a flat brush because it just takes up more space on the paper.
Moi, je l'ai raté.
Wow, ben non, c'est malade. C'est cool.
Ah, c'est bon.
Wow, it's good.
Ouais, merci. Je sais pas, j'ai eu de la misère.
No, c'est super beau. Et it's fast too, hein?
Yeah.
C'est rush, là, on a comme juste une heure, alors c'est normal que c'est pas notre meilleur travail, mais en tout cas,
On commence.
on commence. On commence vite.
Ouais. Fait que là, la semaine prochaine, il y a un autre cours.
Non, ça va terminer parce que je veux planifier une autre session, mais j'ai besoin d'un petit pause parce que je
Ok.
travaille.
Mais tu vas-tu faire des cours genre que payants, là, qu'on pourrait prendre?
Éventuellement, c'était mon essai, celui, mais j'ai pensé peut-être de faire le cours de Crayfish. On peut faire un kit de design, genre watercolor.
OK.
Puis peut-être celui où je monte toute la partie Photoshop vers print on demand, ça va être payant peut-être parce que il y a beaucoup de monde qui veut cette information-là.
OK. Bon,
Oui, puis c'est comme la façon que je gagne mon vie aussi. Alors,
oui, c'est ça.
je ne vais pas donner tous mes secrets gratuitement.
Non, ben non, c'est ça.
Mais c'est
Fait que
ça
tu
au
nous
moins.
tiendras au courant.
Oui, c'est sûr. Puis
Thank
aussi, j'en ai planifié, comme j'ai utilisé des cours en acrylique avec des projets plus longs
OK.
et plus in-depth, genre. Ouais,
All
so
right.
that's coming. Yeah.
So, thank you very much for that.
Oui. Bonne soirée. À la semaine prochaine, finalement.
Merci. Bye.
Attends, à la semaine prochaine, t'as dit?
Oui. On va faire un dernier cours parce qu'on n'était pas capable de finir celui.
OK, la semaine prochaine. OK.
Ça va être juste un cours de plus.
OK, c'est beau.
Pour la fun de faire.
Bonne soirée.
Bye.
Bonne soirée. Bye bye.
Bye.